Sutan Kulkarni. Thank you all for the informative presentations. My first question is to Dr. Mike. In your presentation, you mentioned the concept of regulatory convergence, and one of your it mentioned that regulatory convergence does not require harmonization of laws and regulation. Now, if you look at the business model when pharma goes in registration for any new active molecule in the global strategy, it would be they always look at harmonization as a basic principle, and the whole idea is to have a very cost-benefit analysis. Business always looks at having any new molecule registered with the basic principle of effective cost-benefit analysis. So what I'm trying to bring to you have a harmonized document, and whatever is available from the harmonized document, the business always looks at utilizing resources from one document and getting the whole, the new molecule entity registered in all the globe around. So if you look at the regulatory convergence, which speaks more, which defeats the purpose of harmonization, we are looking at, this is just my opinion, and Mike, I would like you to share your opinion on this. We are looking at having different, documents for different countries, and this would definitely utilize much more resources from pharma, and it would not be a cost-benefit approach. So I just want you to share your opinion on the business model, because from pharma-based point of view. That's my one question. The second question is on you mentioned establishing the national regulatory agencies. So in your discussion, was there any specific national regulatory reference which were discussed? Okay, and I will also have one question later on for Anthony. Thank you for the information on your slides. And you mentioned about Article 170, which soon Mexico is going to sign with, where they can register a molecule in Mexico without a CPP. Now, in the past, we always look at registering anything in Mexico or any more major countries with a CPP, because that's one of the supporting documents for GMP. So, assuming, that gets signed, and I'm sure, Mexico would have gone through if you can share that information, that once you register without a CPP, how would the GMP aspects of the site which is manufacturing the document, the product, how would that be taken care of? That's something if you can share, that is great.
Okay, thank you. So we have three questions, and I think one to myself. I would say the national reference or authorities would be Jose Pena, and then Anthony in terms of the Mexican resolution. What I'll just say about convergence and harmonization, again, I see convergence as a dynamic process over time where regulatory requirements get closer together. And it's not all about harmonization. Harmonization, again, to me is more narrow, extremely important. As was mentioned, I think a common regulatory language, the common technical document is that. That is important not only for filing applications across countries and regions to industry, but it also becomes very important to regulatory authorities, because now we can say, oh, in this application, in this section, we're speaking the same language. And when you make that electronic in the ECTD, that becomes even more important. So harmonization is really critical. That has happened primarily at the level of technical requirements. Once you get into the area of what regulatory authorities do, for example, even if you have WHO guidelines on inspection, and we know that Mercosur has common standards for GMP, but the approaches can be different. So, for example, we have an equivalence agreement with the EU, with EFTA, with Australia, and we don't have exactly the same processes, but they're close enough. Our guidances are close, our approaches are close enough. So the concept of regulatory convergence is about regulators working together and about getting closer in terms of what we're doing. Harmonization is the same technical standard, and it is critically important, but I think there's recognition that we need to go beyond that. And so they're related terms, but they're not synonymous to me. Perhaps on the matter of national reference authorities, and we see that we have 5 to 6 within the Americas, I guess now that they have been assessed by PAHO using a common methodology, the question becomes, what can those regulatory authorities do amongst themselves, and what can they do for the region? So, Jose Peña, if you would like to share your thoughts.
Muchas gracias. Yo voy a tratar de ser muy simple en mis comentarios para que se entienda. Cuando nosotros estamos evaluando las autoridades conforme a ciertos instrumentos, como ya mencioné, el instrumento tiene 3 grandes componentes en cada uno de los módulos. Esto quiere decir estructura, procesos y resultados. Cuando hablamos de estructura, implícitamente estamos hablando también de bases regulatorias, de normatividad. ¿Cuál ha sido la lógica? Y como mencioné también en su minuto dentro de las primeras slides, la idea de este esfuerzo apunta a la implementación de los lineamientos generados en la red PAR. Los lineamientos generados en la red PAR se basan en recomendaciones generales de diferentes cuerpos u organismos internacionales, la ICH, la OMS, FDA, etc. Por lo tanto, uno debería entender que estos países están trabajando bajo la misma orientación de normatividad. Y efectivamente, si uno mira y revisa estos países, por ejemplo, las buenas prácticas clínicas, documentos de las Américas, es prácticamente un copy-paste. Las buenas prácticas de farmacovigilancia, igual cosa. O sea, ¿qué se ha intentado hacer con esto? Todo el esfuerzo de generar normatividad se implemente en los países. Con esta implementación adaptada a los países, que significa en buenas cuentas que no es exactamente, literalmente, lo mismo uno de otro, pero conceptualmente es lo mismo, o sea, digamos, el fondo es lo mismo. Claramente los países pueden generar instancias de confianza y diálogo que les permitan justamente pasar de lo conceptual a lo operativo. Esto quiere decir, por ejemplo, como ya mencioné, en el tema de buenas prácticas de manufactura, los países ya generaron una etapa de confianza, o una instancia de confianza, y hoy día que están trabajando en la cosa operativa, ¿cómo se van a ir acompañando en estas inspecciones y luego para un paso superior, cómo van a reconocer estas certificaciones de buenas prácticas de manufactura como propias? Esto quiere decir, ya no necesitará Anvisa, por ejemplo, visitar una planta productora de vacunas de Cuba, sino que con la certificación de buenas prácticas de manufactura emitida por el CENMED, que es la autoridad de Cuba, será suficiente para que Anvisa diga, está todo ok. Ese es básicamente el ejercicio que estamos haciendo con estos países. Creemos fuertemente que en la medida que los países vayan sumándose a este proceso, y algunos, y hay que decirlo con toda claridad, difícilmente lleguen a ser autoridad de referencia regional, porque tal vez no es su leitmotiv en buena cuenta, tal vez su producción, por ejemplo, en el país no es importante, sino que reciben la producción de otros países, pero si conocen, digamos, de forma precisa y profundamente el proceso, podrán precisamente recoger los resultados de las autoridades de referencia para toma de decisiones en los países. La idea es no duplicar, sino que recoger la información generada por países que han demostrado un buen desempeño en sus funciones reguladoras. Esa es más o menos la idea, en buenas cuentas, de lo que estamos pretendiendo, y como digo, son mecanismos de colaboración que apuntan a fortalecer las autoridades de la región.
follow-up question?
No, Jose, you mentioned in your response. You mentioned in your response about following countries which perform, fairly well. So, what I'm trying to ask, my question was, established national regulatory. So, are we still looking at US, EU, or when you say countries performing, it's a very generic explanation. So, is there something which was identified as, that was my only question. Countries performing well is a very generic. So, we have still we look at US, what has been in the past, or was there anything different discussed? So nothing different has been discussed, that's correct? Because you mentioned in your response that you would look at countries performing well. So now, when you say countries performing well as established regulatory NRAs, that's a very generic answer. So I was not able to understand whether are we still looking at countries besides US, Europe, and whatever was in the past. Mike, did you get my question? Because my question was,
I'm thinking what you're saying is there is a common methodology, a common instrument that is being applied by PAHO to these agencies, and they form teams with regulators and inspectors, etc., and PAHO. So there's a consistent approach, and so if you are at grade 4, you're deemed to be fully functional. And it doesn't mean that each system, like Visa and Vima, would be different, certainly. I mean, they have different systems, but they have been assessed against a common methodology and found to be at a fully functional grade. So I think that is what is being mentioned.
Thank you. Just one more comment. Yeah.
Sí, solamente como para que se entienda más claramente. Parece ser que hice la presentación muy rápido y no se entendió suficientemente, pero lo que hemos generado es un mecanismo de evaluación y certificación de las autoridades, que por cierto, alcanzando el nivel 4, se entiende como efectivamente un nivel de competencia mayor. O sea, es el máximo nivel de competencia dentro de esta evaluación. Ya han solicitado, porque esto es a solicitud de los países, la evaluación 6 países, de los cuales 5 alcanzaron este nivel 4. Hemos preevaluado prácticamente 18 otros países que claramente no están todavía en condiciones de solicitar una evaluación porque saben que están, digamos, lejos o no suficientemente cerca, digamos, lo más polite, de alcanzar el nivel 4. Hoy día lo que estamos diciendo es que estas autoridades, las que han alcanzado el nivel 4, cumplen con los máximos estándares internacionales recomendados por organizaciones tan importantes como la OMS, ICH en algunos casos, FDA, PICS, los que participan en el PICS, etc. Ese es el resultado que hemos obtenido a la fecha. Ahora, pretendemos y esperamos que en el corto plazo otras autoridades también sean evaluadas y alcancen estos niveles máximos, como ya menciono, el nivel 4, que es una referencia regional para OPS.
Firstly, we're over time, but there's a lot of interest in that. So if there's your permission, I think we could go on for a few more minutes on this. So I think, okay, if you could introduce yourself, please, Chair.
Hello? Muy bien. Hi, good morning. My name is Jerry Zapian. I'm with the Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration of the United States. Mike, this question is for you. As you remember, we've worked on more than one APEC, LSIF activities in the past, and whenever you mention words like convergence, harmonization, or equivalence, these are music to my ears. Maybe not the kind of music that Anthony is into, although I'd really like to know what bands he's worked with, and we can do some headbanging later. I brought my air guitar and made it through customs. But there has been some work, some cooperation going on between Health Canada, FDA, TGA, and Anvisa Brazil, insofar as medical device is concerned and GMP inspections. And I was wondering, what can you tell us about the progress that has gone on between these regulatory agencies and what we'll be seeing in the near future? Thanks, Mike.
What you describe is, I think, a very exciting development, because what those 4 agencies are looking at doing is building a single audit program, which means that auditors would go into a facility and meet the requirements of those 4 agencies. What is also interesting about that is that it is based on the Canadian model, whereby it's third parties that do the inspections, but we oversee. The regulators oversee the third parties that are doing the inspections. This is the model in Europe with the notified bodies. This is very different from the pharmaceutical inspection side, but it is something that is more common in the medical device world, and recognizing that similar to the situation with pharmaceuticals, you have components and suppliers and manufacturing all over the world. For Canada, we have over 5,000 sites that are in some way involved in exporting to Canada. We can't do that, the FDA can't do it, and Visa is struggling, TGA the same thing. So it's actually not taking from one another's systems and having them separate, but trying to find common ground and trying to build the best system with some recognition of regional requirements, but it's a longer vision. And so it's about the accreditation of other auditing organizations, and also criteria for competencies, how you conduct an audit, etc., reporting of that. And that applies equally well right now to regulatory authority inspection programs. And there's also the talk of having a unified database, so everything that really makes sense, I think, around a convergence model, we are discussing right now on the medical device side. So I think this is going to be very important, not only within those 4 regions, but driving this forward internationally. It is very much a risk-based approach. It is strategic. We're looking at better than the sum of the parts, and all 4 agencies are extremely committed to that. A component of that is being done internationally under IMDRF, and that's the accreditation of auditing organizations. So there's a lot that's taking place right now. You'll be hearing a lot more about this in the coming years, but I think it is an excellent model for regulatory convergence and working together, and we've got 4 major authorities that are fully committed to that. I'll just say too, on the aspect of regulatory convergence, a good model would be what Larry just said, or touched upon, and that is good review practices. Good review practices, there is no harmonized guidance or standard for that. There's elements of good review practices, predictability, and having procedures, having competency-based training. And so we're talking about looking at converging, not having identical good review practices, but having or strengthening the elements of good review practices. And I think that's a good example of where it isn't a standard, but it is what we're talking about within the broader concept of regulatory convergence, taking account of international technical guidelines as we do evaluation.
Thank you,
maybe
Mike.
we'll take two more questions and then call it a session.
What we've been talking about is something similar to a little article I wrote a while ago that basically said, if you want to promote change, you may need to change the vocabulary. So we've been talking about how we've shifted from harmonization to regulatory convergence. Why did we do that? Some countries felt that harmonization was too high a bar, and so they wouldn't even engage because they felt that they could be held to scrutiny and criticism if they didn't do it. So regulatory convergence is now moving things forward. So Anthony, you used the term mutual recognition, and that's one of those terms that is started to fall by the wayside, because that sort of indicates that you're giving up your autonomy to make decisions. So we've now switched to reliance upon. So for example, the US is working with Canada, Australia, and the EU on a series of GMP and API inspection pilots. And so we're using information from that pilot. We're relying on inspections that other countries have done because we have a risk-based assessment, inspection program. So if one of your trusted partners has recently done an inspection of that facility, that factors into this risk-based approach, so you don't need to go there. Go somewhere else where your resources would be better served. So this is you're relying upon the efforts of someone else to feed into your analysis, and so it's not like you're totally relying on them. It just means that the risk-based approach indicates that you go somewhere else instead.